Okay, you're listening to the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor here on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHMWPPM. Tonight, Budget 101. We're going to walk through the budget, nuts and bolts this week. We'll get into some other parts of it and deeper into it in the upcoming weeks. Denise will then tell us a little bit about a press conference she went to yesterday, the day before, and the third of the show, we will have the rest of our interview with Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing okay. And we also have with us Hall Monitor consumer reporter Lance Haver. Lance, how are you?
Good evening. I enjoyed the first real day of spring a few days early.
Yeah, it was.
I was out and about. It was absolutely beautiful out.
I was in council chambers all day.
You missed one of the reasons to live in the Delaware Valley.
Yeah,
great weather.
Yes, I did. So we have a lot to talk about. The budget process is going to start next week. On Tuesday will be the first of the budget hearings. It'll go for about a month or so. And then we'll have the whole process of passing the budget and all those sorts of things. But Mayor's budget address was last week. It's actually kind of a quicker time turnaround than it usually is. Usually the budget address is about a week earlier, and budget hearings maybe start about a week later. So it's a little tighter this time around. But it gives us a lot more to talk about. So before we get into what all this means, let's just go through Budget 101 a little bit. And if we can bring up that slideshow, Denise, there we go. So fiscal year 2026, the fiscal year begins July 1st. So that's what all of this is leading up to. The budget needs to be passed before July 1st and in order to keep the city running. So what are we talking about when we talk about the budget? It's not just the operating budget, which is the oft-reported $6.77 billion. The real budget, or the combined budget, is actually much more than that. And that's when we talk about the capital budget, which we mentioned right here, this year will be $7.2 billion. Schools, we can talk about SEPTA, water department, airport. All these things really touch the city of Philadelphia and therefore are really part of the larger picture of the budget. For our purposes here tonight, though, we're going to focus more on the operating budget and the capital budget. The operating budget is the day-to-day costs of the city. Employees, contracts, fringe benefits, all these different things that keep the city running on a day-to-day basis. The capital budget, I think of it in two ways. It's buildings and machinery and those kinds of things, and maybe longer-term kind of investments. And there's a divide there because I think it's just easier accounting, right? You have the day-to-day, you have all the things that make the day-to-day go. So that's kind of how they do it. So these are the two things we're going to talk a little bit about tonight, and we will go more in depth as the budget season goes on. And our next slide here. So this is just what the capital budget is going to look like for the next 5 years. The city will always, in addition to the budget, put out a 5-year plan, which gives you a snapshot of what the city's finances will look like for the next 5 years. Very useful, and it does change, and that's perfectly reasonable because you don't know what's going to happen from one year to the next. Sometimes things are better than you expect. Sometimes there's a little bit of a drawback. So you want to, but having the 5-year plan is very useful for what we want to talk about. And these are some of the investments that the mayor wants to make. I don't know if we can see that. It's not coming so clear. But, about half of this upcoming capital budget for the next 5 years, the mayor's going to invest in the clean and green initiatives. A big part of her campaign and the promises that she made and that she's trying to deliver here. And then you'll see some of it's going to public safety, economic opportunity, education. So, that's the mayor's, what she's looking at for the capital budget for the next 5 years. Then we get into the operating budget for the next 5 years. And these are kind of new reallocated investments that the mayor's looking to do. Public safety is the biggest chunk. And, we're talking about things like the forensics lab, We're talking about more hiring and things like that. Economic opportunity. Housing is a key issue. This isn't counting the $800 million investment that the mayor announced during her budget address, and we'll elaborate on more next week. So you see there's a lot more moving around of the money and more focusing on certain things that the mayor's promised over the next 5 years. The capital budget for this year, where money's, what kind of are the big ticket items, the things that you're really focusing on. Again, clean and green, public safety, kind of equal right there, pretty important. Economic opportunity and education, about $20 million to the school district. So these are the key investments that the mayor, again, campaigned on and is trying to make good on. The operating budget, where is money being prioritized? Maybe we're seeing some new money. Again, public safety gets a big chunk. Economic opportunity gets about a quarter of the money. Housing is going to get some more again before we even see that $800 million investment. So again, you're seeing a lot of money being moved into areas where the mayor, again, campaigned on. I thought this was important, and this is all taken right from the budget documents. So the $6.7 billion proposed budget, is looking at really prioritizing, again, these investments, the cleaner and greener, the and the 5-year plan, again, $1.66 billion in new operating investments over 5 years and $1.47 billion over the next 6-year program period. Again, not necessarily new money, but just money being reallocated. Again, the housing initiatives, 30,000 units of housing. We're going to hear more about that next week. Municipal contracts are coming up again this year. There's extra money in the budget specifically set aside for increase in pay for city union workers, very important. And talking about the tax cuts, we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the mayor's prioritizing that, bringing down the business tax and the wage tax this year and over the course of this plan. So,
Larry, were you able to find any line items in the budget for Market Street East?
I haven't gotten through the entire document yet. So I haven't seen anything specific yet.
It's just in all the highlights and all the discussion, I didn't see anything that talked about what the mayor's proposal is to do with Market Street East. And, I think all of our viewers know this was where she wanted to build the arena, and this was so critical and so important. We needed this to revitalize the city. Without this, the city was going to be in desperate shape. And then it moved, and she said she was going to do something. So I was expecting that to be one of the big ticket items, or at least one of the announcements in the budget, and I couldn't find it. But
yeah, I haven't found. I'm digging through the fine print now, and I haven't seen anything directly about that. Where we go? And just looking at one of the things I want to make clear here is when we talk about the budget, we're talking about priorities, and we're talking about what the city wants to invest in, where they think the money is going to be most beneficial. One of the key things that people need to remember is we're actually coming off a period where we had the American Rescue Plan money, which is now going to be gone this year. So the city has recovered economically, the entire country has over the last couple of years, at least to where maybe it was before. And, what we're seeing now is concerns at the federal level about grants and other funds that may or may not make it to the city that we were counting on, which is, nearly $3 billion worth of city revenue comes from the federal government. And that's something that people need to remember. And specifically remember that when we talk about tax cuts. Let me skip around a little bit. So this is where they talk about the tax cuts over the next few years. The birth tax and the wage tax. And I have a good graph about that. Let me actually move up here, and we'll come back to that in a second. So where does all the money come from? So when we talk about city funds and revenue, what are we really talking about? Well, the biggest chunk of money that goes into the city revenue for the operating budget is the wage tax. By far the biggest part of it. After that, it is the BERT tax and property tax. Again, two major drivers. And when you look at it, and this chart, I think, puts it together pretty well. Those three taxes are the biggest parts of the budget picture. And what we're looking at now is a gradual reduction of the wage tax and a gradual reduction with possible elimination of the BERT tax. Meanwhile, property taxes are going to continue to increase. And that's something we're going to be keeping an eye on and be reporting on more as this process goes on. Again, this is a proposed budget. We don't really have we don't know exactly where it's going to end up. And those tax cuts are a concern. And here is how the wage tax is going to be broken down over the next 5 years. When you'll get the resident tax rate right now, 3.75%, and the non-resident rate, 3.44%, you're going to see a drop. So you're going to go in the residential rate from 3.75 to 3.70 by 2030. The non-resident will drop to from 3.44 to 3.39. Okay, these may not sound like big numbers or a big percentage, but they really do add up. You know, you're probably going to be talking about, between the two tax cuts, my quick back of envelope math, about $40 million a year is maybe what all this leads up to. And just to give you an example of what that really means, when city council and the mayor start creating the budget for the upcoming year, a lot of the money in the budget's already accounted for. I'd say probably more than 95% of it, because there are so many things that they already have to get, like employees, fringe benefits. They have to account for these things automatically, and that leaves very little wiggle room for other things. We were in a hearing yesterday talking about inspections for rental, like apartments and things like that. And the city doesn't really do a great job on this. So part of the conversation was, how much money would it cost to do a better job of inspecting rental units? And the number was about $10 or $12 million.
So on the back of the envelope,
yeah,
the way I look at it is the average person, even if you looked at someone who makes $50,000 a year, after the 5-year reduction, they'd be saving about $25. But
yes,
it might cause their rec center to close or their swimming pool not to open. So it's one of those things where it's lots and lots of money, but the people who make out the best are the people who are making $500,000 a year.
Yeah.
People who are making $40,000 a year are seeing a very small reduction in their paycheck of the wage tax. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. What is it worth it to you in terms of how much money you could get back in your paycheck in exchange for having your pool open, or your pool open on time, or your rec center staffed?
And, you know, if you're going to tell me that, you know, we're losing $40 million a year because of this, and hiring more inspectors would cost $10 million, well, doesn't it kind of make sense to say, and knowing that there isn't a lot of extra money after we pay for the things we absolutely have to pay for, that maybe that money could be used better than giving everybody $25 a year?
And included in the expenses, I think there's some things that they really haven't projected, but we should at least consider. The mayor in the budget says, look, we're doing really well on funding our pension plan. But the pension plan is heavily invested, and those investments have suffered. Again, whether you're a Trump supporter or not a Trump supporter, if you look at your investments and your own personal, if you're fortunate enough to have some, they're down somewhere close to 20% since President Trump took office. And that's going to have a tremendous impact on all of the investments that are supposed to be used to prop up the pension plan. If the Medicare and Medicaid cuts go through, the hospitals will not get the payment. And as a result, health insurance will go up. And that, again, is a significant cost to the city of Philadelphia to pay for the health benefits. So there are all these, it's not just the federal dollars that will be lost. It's all these secondary issues. How much is the pension plan funded? How much is health insurance going to go up? What will happen to all of our health centers if Medicaid or Medicare is cut? And the budget does talk a little bit about setting money aside for the federal cuts, but it doesn't really talk about those type of issues. And it doesn't really lay out a very concise question of what would you rather have, a 0.1% cut in your wage tax or a new leader at your rec center. And those are really the trade-offs. It's not as if this is all free. No matter how much money's involved, it has to come from someplace. What's the expression? Right. Free lunch?
Right, absolutely. Unlike the federal government, we can't print our own money. So we're kind of stuck in this cycle here. This is the projected growth rate for wage and earnings tax. And, we can talk about inflation and why this is the way it is. Again, we'll see. I'm not so sure. But economists, and I am not one, I am not a numbers person, so I'm not so sure. But again, we can see. This is what they believe, or this is what the projected cuts are to the business tax and the gross receipts tax. And, we go from, what are we going there? 5.71% down to about 2.8% by 2038 is the projection. And that's a significant drop.
Right. But part of this that's not taken in consideration is in previous years, as a result of council, small businesses got a very significant tax cut. They had it in two ways. One, the first $100,000 of income was untaxed. Small businesses didn't even have to file a tax return. The second thing is the city had a jumpstart program for new businesses. So all new businesses didn't have to pay any taxes for 2 years. The mayor's budget does away with those programs, no longer gives a tax break for small businesses. So if you're a small business up to, I'd say, $1 million a year, you're not going to see a reduction in your taxes because that $100,000 homestead exemption or the $100,000 exemption will be eliminated, and you'll be paying taxes on all of your income and you will not get the benefit. So even if your rate goes from 5.71 to 5.65, which is, it is a reduction, you as a small business person are going to end up paying significantly more. The big winners here are the big businesses, the ones who have millions and millions of dollars in sales and in profits. Now, they are going to see a very significant cut in their tax bite.
And, the idea there is that they will reinvest it, blah, blah, blah. Instead, what they usually do are stock buybacks and CEO bonuses. This is what they predict the growth rate for the real property transfer tax. That is going up. So you're going to see the biggest part of it this year, and then it bounces around a little bit. And we'll talk more about that as we get through the budget.
See, having grown up and paid real estate taxes in New Jersey, whenever I hear the phrase real estate tax, my blood runs cold. And I hear people complain enough about their real estate taxes or even the real estate transfer tax as it is in Philadelphia. And I just wonder, I wonder what this is actually going to mean. Is this like, are homeowners going to get hit with this? Or is it just like people who are trying to transfer land from like the land bank or something?
That's what it is. It's the transfer tax.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to see a little bit of a bump in that.
Historically, the transfer tax is cut between the buyer and the seller, but that's just a tradition. It really depends on whether it's quote unquote a buyer's market or a seller's market. So a number of people who are buying are going to try and negotiate that the seller pays the entire transfer tax. And we may see if the city of Philadelphia is growing in population once again, although a fair amount of that is based on people immigrating to the city, and that may stop as a result of the Trump administration. But the city's population is growing, meaning there's more demand to buy places. And so maybe more of the sellers will say to the buyers, you have to pay 100% of the transfer tax. But the transfer tax, again, is not nothing. We're talking about 5%, $5,000 on 100,000. So, if you're trying to move someplace else, that money may be part of your down payment where you're moving next. If you've been saving for a while to try and buy a place, you have to come up with another $5,000 to be able to put the down payment there.
This is the sales tax, projected local sales tax. If anything was to be eliminated, or reduced, this is the one I would vote for, because this does not impact people equally. It doesn't take in your ability to pay. I've never been a huge fan of sales tax, but over the next 5 years, you're going to see an uptick in what the city will bring in for sales tax.
And again, this is one of those curiosities. On the one hand, they say if we cut the business taxes, you're going to have all this job growth and you're going to have all this income growth. On the other hand, when it comes time to project how much those people who get those jobs and have higher salaries are going to buy, there's almost no projection that they're going to buy more or have more money to spend. So it's somewhat of a curiosity how you can make a projection. We're going to have another 60,000 jobs, and those jobs are going to be higher paid. But when it comes time to project what the sales tax revenue is, and the sales tax revenue will be 6% for the state, 2% for local, we're going to predict that stays flat and that just goes up at the rate of inflation. So it seems like there's really not an expectation that these jobs are created, at least when it comes time to people getting the money and spending the money locally.
And then these are the growth rates for the sales tax. I think what they're really looking at here is inflation and the impact of tariffs and all that kind of stuff. Again, very, to me at least anyway, unpredictable right now based on where we are. And I wanted to put this in there. These are the projected revenues from the beverage tax, the soda tax. $65 million this year, bounces around, doesn't really go below 60,000. All that money goes to, theoretically anyway, goes to pre-K and fixing up the parks and things like that. And Councilmember Jimmy Harity actually wants to do a study on whether or not this tax should be eliminated. So we'll see if this survives over the next couple of years. I'm going to skip.
I predict it will. And the reason why I predict it will is because people are still waiting to get rid of the liquor by the drink tax.
Yeah. And that's been there for quite a while.
That was during the Street administration.
Yes. So that is a very brief overview of just the numbers right now. And so next week we're going to have some hearings, and probably what we're going to do each week is bring you, when we have a hearing, the following, like what the numbers are for that specific department and what they're looking for and key questions we might have. So that's how we're going to handle that week by week, starting next week. But that's just a brief overview. And what do we think about this right now? What are we looking at? What do we want to see?
What I would like to see is the housing plan. Mm-hmm. You're asking for $800 million for a housing plan. I want to see what that looks like. I want to see what you're going to spend that 800 million on, and whether or not we can come to a definition of affordable housing
Yes.
that is actually affordable housing, not affordable housing according to the folks that live in the collar counties, but affordable housing for Philadelphians. That's what I'd like to see. And it's going to be interesting to see if we see that, and what form of, what kind of houses are going to get built out of this plan. And because 30,000 houses is a lot of houses, and where are you going to put them? And is this real estate transfer tax increase that you're going to do going to impact that?
Well, and my concern about this, and again, I want to see the fine print of this plan. I think the $800 million is fantastic. It's more than I expected. I think that's exactly the right way to go. Borrow the money, fix up these houses, or whatever we're going to do, build, fix up. And in time, I think you're going to see huge benefits in a lot of different ways. My concern, though, is does one of these units, one of these 30,000 units, if they put an air conditioner into it, does that count as a rehab house? And I don't, that's what I'm worried about, that we're going to start seeing things like that. But I want to see the plan.
So I have three concerns. The first is why we're not doing more for small businesses, minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses. We started that process. We looked like we were continuing it. This budget eliminates all of those programs. I don't understand the thinking. I don't understand the why. Yes, we need more small businesses. We need local businesses, not just for the business owners, but for the quality of life, dry cleaners, pharmacists, bakeries, small restaurants, small retail, things like that. So that's my first concern. The second is all of these programs that sound so great, we're going to be funding them by borrowing money. Now, what that means is that the city's going to increase what's called its debt service. And as a result, we're going to have to pay that first. And I wonder if the projections for the growth of businesses doesn't come through, what is the city going to cut to pay for those bonds?
And the city debt service is over $250 million a year right now, I believe, Lance, or somewhere around there.
Right. And it's going to go up, as the Federal Reserve announced today. They think that they're not going to cut interest rates any longer because of the tariff war. And we don't know how that will affect the bond market, but it will have some impact potentially. And the last thing is, I don't really see anything about the quality of life in the city. And that may be addressed for many people by public safety or by greening it. But things like the neighborhood business corridors don't appear to be getting the funding that they used to. And that's my final concern. Now, maybe as the hearings go forward, we'll hear more about those things. But that's it. One, how do we help small businesses? Across the board, cuts won't do it. Two, if the business projections are wrong and there's not more money coming in as a result of the tax cuts, which line items are going to get cut to pay for the bonds? And three, what do we do to make people's lives better?
So let's talk about concerns. Denise, yesterday you attended an event, a press conference about, I think mostly about the tax cuts, but some of these other concerns. And Lance, people who were there are like friends of ours, like Stan Shapiro and Mark Steyer and other people like that. So can you guys just tell us a little bit about, Denise, tell us what that event was about, and Lance, elaborate more on some of those concerns.
Sure. Mark Steyers, who we had on the show last week, from Penn Policy Research, did a presentation called "Philadelphia Needs to Reduce Poverty and Grow Its Economy, but Business and Wage Tax Cuts Are Not the Answer." And like he did here on the show, he broke down some of the many reasons why that's not the case, why cutting taxes may not be the case. The money doesn't go where it ought to go. It doesn't benefit who it should benefit. Sorry. And, different things like that. And they were talking a lot about how the numbers that the tax commission used, the tax reform commission used to do its assessment were different numbers than the numbers that are actually in play here. That they used a different set of numbers, an older set of numbers that, made it sound like Philadelphia wasn't creating jobs because it wasn't cutting taxes. And he used the examples of Boston and San Francisco as two states that are growing in terms of job creation, in terms of population, in terms of all those things. But because they haven't relied as much on, say, a wage tax, and they're not cutting business taxes, you can't say that not cutting business taxes is the reason why Philadelphia isn't growing in terms of finance, in terms of business growth. In fact, the argument that Mark made is that the business income and receipts tax, BERT, which is kind of like the main thing everyone's talking about in this, is, it's not the reason why Philly isn't, why jobs are leaving Philly. They're leaving Philly because, they're leaving Philly for other reasons. It's not the fact that the BERT and wage taxes are high. And, only 30% of the businesses that are in the city actually pay the BERT. So that can't be it. And, they're saying that the folks need to find out what is keeping people from growing their businesses here. And part of that is probably affordable housing or the lack thereof, or not having enough skilled workers, which is something that Boston and San Francisco both have. And where if you're going to like move money around and cut a tax, that maybe you should take that money and put it toward training programs so that we can have the kind of skilled workers here in Philadelphia that Boston and San Francisco have, that have helped their economy grow. But probably the most interesting part of the whole press conference for me personally was learning that Philadelphia has a wage tax refund ordinance. Now, I've been covering City Hall for a lot of years, but I had never heard of this. And I spoke to a gentleman named Jonathan Stein. He's an attorney who's of Council for Community Legal Services. And he was on the last Tax Reform Commission and said that he had recommended that the city streamline the way that low-income workers can access this tax. Because the way you access it now, you have to go through the state, and you can only make $15,000 a year in order to qualify for it. And you have to go through the state before you can apply for it here in Philadelphia. And because of that, only 1,600 of the people who could be using this tax refund are doing so. And when you consider the number of working poor people here in Philadelphia, that's just wrong. And part of that is no one knows about it. There's not enough advertising about it. There's not enough discussion about it. It's not enough understanding about it. So my goal is to have Mr. Stein come on and talk to us a little bit about this tax refund, how people can access it, and how it connects to the earned income tax credit, which is also for working poor people, and gives them a chance to get that money back. And I was talking to some of my friends in City Hall about why no one knows about this tax. And after a fairly robust rant from one of them about how the government cannot be expected to advertise everything, I'm like, I understand that, but you can advertise something like this.
Yeah.
Because you are the poorest city of its size in the United States of America. So it would make sense that you would want people to know that there is something available to them that might allow them to, get a new bed for their kid, or new shoes, or, put a little extra on college tuition. You might want to let people know that this exists.
Or shop locally and keep the economy going.
Exactly. Or, be able to go to the grocery store and, I don't know, buy a dozen eggs.
Just along those things that people don't often consider, a lot of people have been moved from employees to independent contractors. And because they make less than $100,000 a year under the old business taxes, they didn't have to file, they didn't have to pay business taxes on that. Under the mayor's current proposal, every contractor, every person who's been forced to give up their employee status and work as an independent contractor will now end up paying taxes. And they'll end up paying taxes that they never paid before. So instead of getting the $50,000 a year, they're now going to get $45,000 a year, with the other money going to the city taxes.
And the thing is, with the number of independent contractors that this city has, and it's a lot. I mean, just in the journalism space.
Yeah.
Almost all of us that are doing this as independent contractors. And the fact that we're doing this as independent contractors, this is going to have a real impact on what we're able to do.
Right.
Because, paying taxes that you didn't see, especially when you're not necessarily making tons and tons of money, that's a problem.
And of course, the tax reduction won't help anyone who wasn't paying taxes and now has to. So saying instead of paying them at 5%, you'll have to pay them at 4.5% isn't a big savings for someone who wasn't paying them at all before.
Yep.
So my goal is to have Mr. Stein on to talk about this a little more, and to hopefully let people know that this is available to them, so that until they actually streamline the process, which is something that the folks in the tax reform advisory commission were talking about yesterday, until they get to a point where this is streamlined, they want to help people be able to access it.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial, and that's something we can help with that. And I think we should, and all these different kinds of programs. But some of these changes, I'm a little concerned about them. When we don't know if we're going to get all this federal money that we usually get, and we know that the ARPA money is gone, we know that things cost more, we're worried about inflation, is now the time to be cutting taxes. And that doesn't feel like the right thing to be doing to me,
Well, that also depends on, how you look at it. You have some people who think this is absolutely the right time to cut taxes because, you got to grow business, you got to grow business, you got to grow business. But on the other hand, you have a state government that is not inclined to give the city of Philadelphia anything. You have a federal government, and I'm not even going to get into that.
Well, and we can't because we don't know.
Right. You have these two funding sources that the city has traditionally relied on that are quixotic at best and insane at worst. And you're going to cut tax money at a time when you don't know what either of these entities are going to do.
Right. So we're going to have to leave it there. And now we're going to go to our interview, the conclusion of our interview with Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke.
Topic.
All right. I'd like to bring in Denise Clay-Murray here on Philadelphia Hall Monitor. Denise, can you hear us there? I think you're muted.
I'm sorry about that. And hopefully now you can see me. Hi. Well, Councilman, thank you so much for giving us some of your time. There's a question that I asked you when you first became a councilor about what part you think your ministry is going to play in how you govern.
Yep.
Now it's been a while since you've been a council person.
Yeah.
Have you found that your ministry has played more of a role than you thought, or less of a role than you thought?
The straight answer is more. And thank you for raising the question. First of all, Denise, it's always good to see you. And it looks like you are keeping true to the name of this particular publication, the hall monitor, as you were looking, you were taking this in the hallway. And I love that. Let me just say, when you asked that question, I was really trying to figure out what it did mean to be a minister, to be not just a minister, but a pastor with a charge. I have a congregation, a flock of folks whose well-being is a priority in my life. And at the time, it was unclear to me. And I was a bit unsure because of the uncomfortabilities that kind of surround it. If I can say respectfully, Lawrence was the first person I think to ask me about some of my references to faith in my first maiden speech on the floor. And so certainly everyone is not welcoming of such thinking. But I was in a lot of prayer and discernment throughout the course of those first 6 months, the whole time, really. It happened in July. There was a moment I was actually in the middle of a sermon on Sunday where there was a clarity that came. It was on the lead up to the DNC. There was a lot of obviously national conversation about there's a lot going on, right? There's war in the Middle East, right? Many folks will call it genocide. Many of folks, and wherever you fall on the line, it has stirred the emotions of many people. There was issues around the prospect at that time of another Trump administration. Unfortunately, that has come to pass. So much going on. And somewhere along the way, there was this revelation about the role of spirit. And I talked a little bit about this on the floor yesterday, in the chamber yesterday during council. Even within the legal profession, the concept of the spirit, there's the concept of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. That spirit is not a thing that is only controlled or held in exclusion within the realms of the religious. Spirit is something that transcends that. Even Jesus talks about, the spirit's like the wind. You don't know where it's coming or where it's going. But it's a thing that is recognized in some way. We have spirited debates. We talk about spirit in other ways that may not have anything to do with dogma or doctrine. And once I realized that as a minister dealing with things of the spirit, that wasn't devoid from the people's work, that there is a spirit in the law that we're making it, like when I make points around wanting to measurably and materially improve the lives of working people. That is a spirit of compassion, dare I say. Compassion meaning to suffer with, calm meaning with, passion meaning suffer, to suffer with people. In recognizing people suffering, wanting to suffer with them, that we might be able to reign and overcome together. That's a spirit. So to speak. And so I have found it to be very helpful to find myself to be comfortable with such talk, because more people actually resonate with it. Maybe not at the top level about, maybe how I might identify as a theologian, but they may resonate with it, dare I say, at the spiritual or cellular level. Something resonates, and people can seem to connect when your heart is in something. Values are the same thing. If you don't like the term spirit, you can use the term values. Right? There's a lot of nomenclature that goes into lawmaking, but ultimately you're trying to push against austerity and push for provision. You want to push for, I don't know. You want to see love. We have a whole sculpture that's the city is known for, sitting in the middle of the city, that says love. Right? How does that play a role in the way that we write law? Right? Law is word. It's language. I'll say this and I'll shut up. There's a Hebrew passage, Hebrews 11. The worlds were framed by the word of God. I love that passage. That the idea, this is, mythology for some, right? But the idea that reality itself was framed by language, by the word, spoken or written. And so I kind of think about it here in the city. How are we shaping the reality of the city of Philadelphia? One whose very name has love in it, to reflect that love, reflect that compassion, reflect that spirit in the way that we live. And so it has been helpful for me. It has been grounding for me, and actually has been liberating for me, because I don't have to hide my spirituality. It informs the way that I show up.
In terms of the bill regarding renters and their protections, how do people access that? Do they access what those provisions say, through your office? Will there be a specific office that deals with that? How will people be able to access that so they can use that to help them out?
So this is a growing problem, right? The idea that these algorithms are being used by corporate landlords. Most people don't know it. So part of what I was saying at the beginning is that we see this whole campaign is also to include also spreading the word about the existence of the ban itself. We can get folks connected to the various groups. Like I said, our office is glad to be partnering with the Public Interest Law Center, as well as Francis Melman, which is a consumer protection firm that helps out tenants who think that they may have been impacted. We can get folks connected. The issue is not so much getting them connected to these folks that can help them get legal representation to hold landlords accountable. It's folks knowing that the tool exists in the first place, that the ban is there. So part of basically what we're doing is getting people, letting them know that this exists, that this is illegal in the city of Philadelphia, and being the point person or setting up points of contact by going directly to, in some cases. We were at Quaker Courts not too long ago, letting folks know about it. Had a little small press conference, not, wasn't too big, but being out there with palm cards in hand, information sheets, fact sheets in hand, giving to those folks to let them know, hey, if you suspect XYZ, contact these numbers and we'll get you connected to the tools that you need to be able to make sure that we hold those landlords accountable. So it really is more than anything, it's that connection that which is really a prevalent problem, I think, in government. So many folks feel disconnected from it. And so I think that by doing it, we're doing quite a number in helping folks get the resources that they need.
Okay, now during yesterday's council session, which I ended up watching from home because I'm battling the elements and I didn't want to expose everybody to it. There were more than a few public commenters that talked about how they perceived the city to be too pro-immigrant, if that's a thing. Yeah. The word xenophobia kept coming up during some of the speeches that folks on the floor made about some of that perception. Philadelphia, we're the city of brotherly love. That's kind of our shtick. That's what we're known for. But the country as a whole seems to be moving into one of those, time periods where the Statue of Liberty, could be, flown out on a rail and no one would miss it. Mm-hmm. How can Philadelphia maintain its spirit during a time like this, where you basically have people, saying, get these people out of here, when in some cases, these people are just minding their own business and trying to live?
This is a really good question. I'm thinking about Howard Thurman. He was a mentor of Dr. King. I think he taught him at one point at Boston College or had some connection with him. Christian mystic, doesn't necessarily even need to be Christian. I got a few devotionals here in front of me of his that I love, like the Inward Journey there. And I think it's actually in the Inward Journey here, in somewhere in here, where he asks the question. He doesn't ask the question. He makes the statement. Don't ask what the world needs. Find out what makes you come alive and go do that. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Somebody else said democracy dies in dark. I guess that was the Washington Post quote before Bezos took it over. Democracy dies in darkness or something.
By oligarchs, yes.
There is something to be said about waking up. I know that's a term that somehow, this makes me itch. Somehow the term woke was given over to supremacists and nationalists and somehow made it derogatory. I refuse it. Do I want to be asleep? It's really absurd, the idea that would be a derogatory. But to stay awake, as King would say, in the times of great revolution, I engaging in these times, stepping up, waking up, coming alive, I think is really the way that Philadelphia continues to fight back, continues to maintain its spirit. I was standing after, I guess it was last Thursday, not yesterday, but last week after council session, with folks like Juntos, Viet Lead, as we were calling for the release of a gentleman named One Van. He's never been to, he's sitting up in Moshannon right now, which is where migrants are being held, detention center, likely to could potentially be sent back to a country that he has never been to a day in his life, right? I was moved deeply. I'm kind of feeling it now. With when my colleagues showed up, and I didn't expect them to, honestly. Councilmember Landau and Councilmember Jones. And he leaned over to me in his speech and before he got up to speak and said, you know, you taught me something today. He said, I learned something today with this, and that's the reason why he came out. And he actually, in his stump, kind of off the cuff, right? This is all him learning from council session to basically right after council when we had the press conference. He quoted, "There's a big old statue outside of New York in the water that's inscribed on it, 'Give me your tired, give me your hungry, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched of the earth.'" And he said, it seems like exactly what you said, like that could just get shipped off to at this time in our country and go away. But him saying that, him showing up, Landau showing up and standing there on a thing that may or may not be popular. I'm not a Democrat. I know there are weird things that happen in the party. You know, you can get held accountable for stuff that you don't know, weird unwritten rules, but they showed up. They came alive. They stepped up. They leaned in, right? And I think we need more of that. A sensitivity. I have no doubts that part of it may be that in this time, this holy month of Ramadan, Councilman Jones is a little bit more sensitive to spirit. You know, a lot of us are, you know, a little bit more palatable, a little malleable in that regard and willing. But I think more of that sensitivity to the suffering of others, the reality of what's going on, and being willing to be who we truly are in our heart, I think is what can do it. There's an old song that we sing as Birds fans. Even when the thing that we may be advocating for may be unpopular or may be up against a lot of resistance. No one likes us, no one likes us, no one likes us, we don't care. No one likes us, no one likes us, no one likes us, we don't care. Something like that. And I think that sort of boldness and willingness to lean in, to come alive, to be who we are, to be the city of brotherly love, sisterly effectiveness, sibling solidarity, and don't care what nobody has to say about it, I think is what makes us distinct, what makes us an incredibly good place to grow a family, I believe. And in the words of Councilman Driscoll, the best damn city on the planet, the best city in the world. And so I think that we need to do more of that. We need more of that sort of, I don't know, holy courage, you know, human courage in this time. Maybe it seems a bit abstract, but I think if the more it seems, the more we get away from those value spiritually abstract things, the more rigid and inhumane and technocratic and wrong-headed we become.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. And by the way, my birthday is May 24th.
Oh, so you say wait a day?
Yes, congratulations on your little one.
I'll tell my wife to wait a day and name him Lawrence.
Yes, there you go.
Oh my, I'm not sure she'd agree with that, but we'd be cool with it.
That'd be wonderful.
The official hall monitor baby.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I'm going to give you back to Larry McGlynn, and you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPN 106.5.
Thank you, Denise. Now, Councilmember, before we let you go, I'm going to ask you the tough question here. We are seeing at the federal level across national politics, I don't know, the installation of an oligarchy. It is in place. This is what I believe is happening. What do we do as Philadelphians, as Americans, to weather this storm and fight back as best we can?
The first thing I got to say that we got to do is let people know what oligarchy is. That's half the problem. It's hard to fight a thing and you don't know what it is. We use these terms, and it's unfortunately it's just not common language. One of the things that we have been doing, when I say we, I'm talking about the Working Families Party, has been just that sort of basic meme education. So many folks are on social media. It was a great gift from the departing president, President Biden, to use his ending speech, his concluding speech of his presidency to lift this fact that you have lifted, Lawrence, which is that an oligarchy has taken shape in the United States. And so, you know, when I say the word oligarchy, folks may not get it. Even when I say billionaires, folks may get that a little bit more. But what we have is also a lot of folks who don't really realize that there's a really, 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 really big difference between a millionaire and a billionaire. And so I think education in this time, making sure that folks understand the symbolism that we see out there. This is a bit headier than I prefer, but I think part of this is it does require some education. That when you, in any other presidential inauguration, have a sitting U.S. president or one who's about to be inaugurated, and behind him is a line of literally the richest people on the planet with better seats than sitting governors in the union, that should say something to everybody who cares. And so it's important that in order for us, those of us who will not abide oligarchy in our country, it's important for all of us to recognize that that is what we are up against, that there are a number of little fights that are beneath that. And we certainly, in all those matter, I'm going to always have my eye and my commitments to the least, the lost, and the left out, as we say in my tradition. Those who are marginalized and on the fringes of society. And also, there is a major fight that cuts across all of our fights. It's the many of us against the few of them. And as long as we maintain that clear dynamic, right? That clear understanding that, so much of what we're dealing with is I think I heard reports today that Marco Rubio was annoyed with Elon Musk and what's going on, right? The people need to recognize that that is where the line is at its height. It is a class issue in the non-class. It's the many against the few billionaires. And so we're clear. I mean, they're clear about what their interests are. We got to be clear as a collective about what ours are, which is the reason why I keep invoking such things that may be seen as lofty and hallmarky, but like love, like at some point that's got to matter, right? We have to care, C-A-R-E, right? Care. The last thing that the president said in his speech was talking about, an age of common sense. The many of us need to recognize care as common sense, not how to make sure that the next corporation can squeeze more money out of a turnip, or how we can exploit on more, get cheaper labor here, or whatever the case may be. But how do we prioritize as a form of governance, lawmaking, even judging, the priority of care first for those who are most oppressed, and then but of course for everybody, I think is going to be something that we have to get seated inside of us and allow it to animate us as we can resist this oligarchy in our country at this time.
All right, Councilmember Nicholas O'Rourke, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we'd like to thank Councilmember O'Rourke for being with us, and Lance Haver as always. Denise will be back next week where we'll be previewing the first budget hearings. So we'll see everybody next week on Hall Monitor.